It just doesn't make sense. It's like skill-based matchmaking in public games. Why the fuck would you have skill-based in a public game?
Terrible balancing, Divas Matrix smothering everybody, Moth Mercy meta, Briggs release and subsequent 5,000 nerfs, Goats meta.
Cheaters in Siege are probably the #1 issue facing the game.
But this game is absolutely disastrous with its performance. Even on PC, I encountered so many problems.
Unity CEO John Riccitiello decided to sneakily alter the deal and announced maybe the worst monetization scheme I have ever seen. What they want to do is charge Unity developers a fee per install.
Video game companies are the founders who are responsible for a lot of great games over the last few centuries and have been a part of a lot of childhoods. With the expansion of gaming industry, the selection of games has been endless with the various technological advancements and creative ideas. The industry has grown to new heights, but we've been having a lot of issues with the vast amount of questionable business decisions from many companies. From the very predatory business models to focusing more on graphics than a compelling story. Or how about the time the ex-CEO of the most popular engine, Unity, they tried to pressure game devs into monetizing by charging them royalties per download, and that's not including the monthly fee they already pay for even using the engine. This is pure greed at its finest. The ex-CEO of Unity was also the ex-CEO of EA, and he was infamous shady business practices like charging people money for reloading their guns in Battlefield. Okay, I had to take a step back and assess what the hell I just read. Yeah, this man is the most greedy individual even for EA, a company that has a reputation for being greedy, and this man is too much for them. Let that one sink in. Now, this topic is something I wanted to talk about since I've been recently playing PC games whenever I have time. I thought it was interesting to talk about the things I've seen in recent times by some companies and the more than questionable business decisions have made some very scary precedents for the gaming space as a whole, mainly stemming from greed as a factor for a lot of their bad decision making. Yeah, we can deny that video games cost a lot of money to produce and create, and the change to the prices of games is so understandable, going from $60 to $70, but companies have been trying to find ways to squeeze out more and more money out of gamers. It started when the concept of loot boxes being a thing in games during the early time of free-to-play mobile games, and during this time, it was their way of monetizing an otherwise free game. The loot box system is very divisive inclusion to many games because it uses RNG to reward players with in-game items, whether it's new cosmetics or new content. This whole loot box thing falls into the very dubious territory. What I mean is that this introduces gambling to a young audience. Yeah, even if the games might not be for minors, we can't deny that younger people make up a huge demographic of gaming. The problem lies in the fact it introduces gambling to kids and has always been a gray area for many gaming companies. Loot boxes became more and more common during the mid-2010s when more and more companies tried to push boundaries time and time again. Soon it became a problem that big games began to use them regularly. Then we have EA. They always take it too far with the Star Wars Battlefront 2, and where it would make their whole progression system a pay-to-win nightmare, and rightfully everyone called them out for their greed. The decision would later be reformed of this horrible decision, but it left a stain on how far some games take it. It's still a very gray area since companies have put rules in place to make sure these things don't get too out of hand. Gacha games have become popular in recent times where they make the most of the game difficult to grind. Not impossible, just difficult. But they have a similar loot box business model that gives in-game items. This skirts the line so much because you technically can make it possible to get those items if you grind a lot, or you just opt to get the items through the gacha system. It's a very slippery slope that makes it difficult to manage. The biggest concern is to make sure that children don't gamble, but it is still not completely regulated. Is there a solution to this? Well, I got nothing. Companies are also probably not willing to give up on their lucrative business model anytime soon. But hey, there was at least something done to make sure companies don't abuse. But that can't be said for some of the other less than stellar monetizing practices. In recent times, we have seen the use of subscription services becoming more and more prominent within most industries. Starting with streaming services offering subscription services, now it makes it hard to watch all of them. With time, more companies have tried to use this model for their games. a lot of companies have tried to hop on the bandwagon and have incorporated their own version of a subscription service. This mentality of profit over product can be seen when Ubisoft exec said that us gamers should get used to not owning games, as well as talks of a subscription service being implemented. People obviously commented against the terrible decision, but it hasn't stopped some game companies from trying. Like overpricing literally everything. I mean, for real, why is Valorant charging almost $40 or more for a simple knife, and with animations and variation being tied to another currency? Don't get me started with Overwatch, for having 3 different currency systems that have to be bought separately at different prices. Then, video game companies have been milking the gaming industry for all it's worth, and now people have been giving strong pushback against companies for their terrible business practices, especially when it comes to how out of touch execs tend to be sometimes, and they just outright don't listen to the community who are responsible for keeping the games alive. Game companies not only have been trying to squeeze out money from gamers, they've also been doing the same to game developers and workers. For years, game workers have been the ones who do all the heavy lifting to make games possible. Of course, there are a lot of moving parts involved in game development, but it's not possible without those workers, and a big concern is the overworking and sometimes destructive work culture. Other problems we have is the quality of games and how a lot of games come out unfinished or subpar. It's true that making a hit piece is a tall tale considering how hard and complex the gaming market is, very difficult to get into, and both big corps and indie developers know how the pressure is never ending and grueling for those who have to perform. Those who work in the industry have to deal with a lot of randomness and unpredictability. There is no perfect formula, and that just adds another layer of stress onto the already overworked employees. This is where the crunch culture rears its ugly head. Now, we understand the point of having to meet certain deadlines, and we all know how stressful the workload can be leading up to the deadline. Crunch time is the act of working excessive hours far outside of overtime. We are talking 12 plus hours, where all workers do is work and sleep for days or months, leading to them constantly being overworked and fatigued. In the gaming industry, having a deadline is normal. I mean, all industries have them, but it's especially bad in gaming since games take a long time to make. Whole teams have to make full games at unbelievable speeds, and this is where workers start working long hours, closer to 12 plus hours at any given time. In a lot of companies, it's too common to the point it's almost considered a requirement to be able to work way past normal working hours. Noodle had a good video analyzing the crunch culture called The Crunch Culture Conundrum, which is a good video, by the way. You should watch it on your own time, link in the description. But in chapter 1 of the video, he talks to a person working called Chris of the Dead, a person who has worked in the industry. He talks about how the problem of crunch culture is often undermined by higher-ups who said that no one is being forced to work long hours. There's no gun to your head, but the culture around the industry says otherwise. When your job and spot in the industry is at stake, sure, they don't have to work those long hours, but if the job is not finished by the end of the month, who are they going to blame? Well, the employee, obviously. And that's how a lot of aspiring creators get coerced into essentially selling their soul to their jobs, with the social expectation to perform above and beyond what could be considered safe and healthy work hours. This gun to your head argument puts blame onto the workers for their actions, instead of the work culture that caused this behavior in the first place. What makes this an uphill fight is the fact that the others might not see both sides of the argument and think, if a worker is passionate, then of course he might work more hours. Their passion is often weaponized and used against workers that think that they're working hard because that's what they want. Don't often realize that they're being exploited, often to the benefit of their superiors and execs, and they might not be properly compensated for these ungodly work hours. Sure, sometimes crunch time is required from employees because of looming deadlines, and no one ever checks on the employees to see if they're okay. This often leads to burnout, loss of passion for employees, mental breakdown, or worse, actual harm to the physical health. People never come back the same working in an industry that is mentally and physically taxing on anyone. This leads to the next problem devs might face, which is burnout that heavily affects a game dev's creative output. A lot of games in recent years have had an obsession with making higher quality, and that is understandable, but some companies take it too far when a game's only selling point is improved graphics over anything and doesn't really have much substance. A lot of AAA games have had their fair share of good games, and some are still held in high regards years after they were released. But then why have them games not evolved from then? The answer is rather simple: money. Gaming companies have been more and more open to releasing games that are unpolished and have a whole lot of list of problems that we have known for a while. First, we have our surface level problems like unfinished games, terrible monetization of everything, unnecessary politics that I would rather avoid, don't want to step on a landmine, and finally, just no love and care for these games. Now, AAA titles require more and more money, so companies are not willing to risk a lot, so they play it safe. With insane returns, investors would invest with the hopes of big returns. Usually this would not be a problem, but it does, due to the fact that investors want to make sure they guarantee a return on investment, and they would rather go with a household title instead of an ambitious title from an unknown studio, and the industry has been like that for the last few years. Think about it, Activision's new COD games are just the same games pumped out time and time again with even more egregious sales tactics. The game has been long dead since the release of Ghost and its subsequent failure. It had multiple chances to come back, but it kept falling short. Modern Warfare 2019 and Warzone had a chance to be the best games ever, but Activision and their infinite wisdom decided to keep shilling and just kept pumping out the same game, expecting people to still willingly pay $60 per new edition. Granted, the release of a new game every year was a disaster waiting to happen. For years they kept releasing a new title yearly. They were bound to hit a wall, and they just kept going. Then we also have games like Overwatch that fumbled the bag with the introduction of their second game. Not only did they remake the way the game is played, that caused a divide among player base, but the fact that the company still makes stupid business decisions and terrible balancing that has the whole community constantly up in arms. Against their terrible decisions, gaming companies have focused on appeasing investors instead of the gamers, and it has shown in the last 10 years how gamers are seen as cash cows. But that is where the indie game developers come in, with Steam being a very big shop where gamers can find a lot of games. It has spawned a lot of small game devs who have a passion for games. We have a lot of gyms out there, and with the recent times, those games have become more popular than some of the biggest indie releases. Those indie games succeeded where AAA games have failed. And the answer is simple: it is passion. Gaming companies have made games that in every sense of the word are dead. Many new devs have made games filled with passion, and it shows with the way that they develop games. In time, they have been taking the market, and soon companies have to make big changes eventually. Indie developers have been making games that have very big audiences waiting for more. Like for example, take Five Nights at Freddy's, which was responsible for most modern day mascot horror, and then we have Hades, a game that popped off and has been a very popular game ever since it released on Steam. And we have games like Lethal Company, which is a great party game for friends to fuck around and is easy for most players to pick up. A lot of the indie scene has taken hold over the gaming market, even beating some well-established games. This video was more of an observation and a mini rant talking about how games have been losing their touch, as well as what made them so great, and in time there are a lot of factors that make this a difficult thing to answer. But the thing is that the gamers also have a big say in this conversation. It has been more and more difficult to please gamers. Game devs and a lot of people who work on these types of games have often commented how their lives have turned into a living hell when they make mistakes. Of course, companies are to blame for their terrible decisions, but the harsh response from the gamers have been the source of a lot of stress for many developers. Some have made posts either commenting out with the stories of harassment or outright showing chat logs of people sending death threats to them. That not only is a terrible thing to do, but it also gives a lot of unnecessary stress on those who have passion for these games. Well, I hope that there is a change for the better, and in time, these conversations won't be that serious. But that's just wishful thinking. Either way, one can hope. What do you think is the problem with the gaming industry? Let me know in the comments and leave a like and subscribe. Peace.